Hi, I'm Jenny Skiffington.
And I'm Laura Brunkala, and this is Propicks. We watched The Sticky! And it is fun!
It is wild. It came out this last year.
Yeah.
It is about a maple syrup heist.
Yeah,
Can you believe this?
And it's actually based on a true story, sort of. Actually, not at all. I think it begins with this is not at all based on that story.
Which is kind of amazing. But who knew that maple syrup was like this huge industry in general? I had no idea.
It is a giant commodity. So I happen to love this podcast called Scamfluencers. And Scamfluencers covered the maple syrup heist. It's in, I believe isn't it Vancouver that the actual one happened in, I think.
I'm not sure. Somewhere in Canada,
because it's
right?
Canada.
Yes.
It's Canada. So Canada,
maple syrup.
they like regulate their maple syrup really heavily, and it's a very like locked up industry. And a lot of the maple syrup, I guess, are farmers. Maple syrup farmers.
Yeah.
Sorry to you maple syrup people, we don't know all the terminology. But they feel like they don't get the money that they deserve. And okay, this is on Amazon Prime, just so you guys know where to watch. It is listed under comedy.
It's pretty funny.
It is pretty funny.
It is also pretty dark. I would say
it's dark comedy.
Solid dark comedy.
Yeah.
Yes. If you like, speaking of comps.
Oh yeah, okay, so we're gonna do comps, which we always do. Jenny, what are comps?
Comps are shows that maybe like this. If you like these shows, you might like The Sticky. If you like The Sticky, you might like these. Yeah. I would say Fargo, Big Lebowski, all Coen Brothers, for sure.
Yeah, even like Donnie Darko or Edward Scissorhands in some ways. Because, okay, while not quite that wild or crossing that line, we're a little bit more based in reality here. The characters feel that big, and it does get like moody and interesting that way, you know?
It's a very fun heist film.
Yeah, if you like heist movies, if you like action movies, it is a ton of action.
Yeah, so much is just like going, and a lot of miscommunications and misconnections and bad decisions potentially. A lot of impulsive decisions on these characters' parts that like take them down a rabbit hole. Like I said, very similar to Fargo. Plans gone wrong. Another comp for this show I think would be Breaking Bad. You know, someone in a desperate situation who does something very unexpected. And
it's an unlikely trio that comes together to pull off this heist.
Very much like in Breaking Bad.
Yeah. And another comp that I kind of just thought of that in tone, because we've been talking about some tech specs and some shooting aspects of lighting and mood and having this kind of like creepy opening. It makes me think of Zodiac in its lighting in the cold open. When we see the cold open, we get these interesting tones and kind of an overall ominous feel where you're like, whoa, where are we and what are we about to see?
Yeah.
But it doesn't, I wouldn't say that stays throughout, but at least in speaking to tech specs in the cold open.
Yeah. And then throughout it just has kind of a really fun, quirky, surprisingly light feel. We're in this diner a lot in this small town, and so there's that element of small town
vibes. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody's in everybody's business. People are calling each other saying, we know what you did to this person, and we don't like it.
Right. Our main character, Ruth, that we're introduced to at the beginning, she may have to lose her farm to this big company that's taking over, and she's kind of in a desperate place, so she makes some unlikely alliances to form this crazy maple syrup heist.
And woo, we got quirky characters, really interesting people on this. Margo Martindale plays Ruth Landry, and she is fantastic.
Oh, she's amazing. I've been following her career for years. If you recall, like in the 80s and 90s, she had very small roles here and there, and it's been really cool to see her dive into these like really fun, meaty roles. This character, Ruth, is amazing. I love how she's so no nonsense.
It is incredible that you said meaty, because that's the word I was going to use to describe the acting in this. Her role is so layered, and we get to see her in so many modes, from being this like really tough chick to a really emotional, soft character. Right. And she is another one that I keep using the word unpredictable. We watch shows with a lot of like wild characters.
There's a lot of things where you're like, wow, that character's really going there. Okay.
And right from the first episode, we see stuff right off the bat that we're like, whoa!
What's happening?
Some slightly unhinged behavior from many characters, including Ruth and
Chris Diamantopoulos, who plays Mike, is this really interesting character because he starts in one place and you kind of think he's a certain type of guy, and then as we get to know him throughout the series, things develop.
I'm not going to be shy about it. I looked at Jenny and I was like, that guy is hot. And so,
in his red Jolly Rancher jacket.
Yeah. Toot your own horn, Chris, because we looked at you and went, that guy is hot, but you're crazy in this. You are straight crazy.
And what about Remy? Remy is amazing too. Yes. He kind of kickstarts this whole heist as a character. He is also adorable and quirky and fun. Him and his dad and the ferrets. Yeah. It's so sweet.
He's like kind of like your nerdy sweet best friend who like wants to be cool.
Yes.
And maybe has some cool moments throughout the show. I think we see. So, okay, wait. Let's rewind. Jenny and I watched the show thinking, let's watch one or two. We usually try to give it like two so we have enough to talk about. Mm-hmm. We could not stop.
Yeah, once you start, you can't stop. We watched the whole thing in one night.
It's a 6-episode limited series, and we watched all 6.
And how much fun that Jamie Lee Curtis comes in halfway through the series.
Yes.
And she is so much fun in this.
Jamie Lee Curtis plays Beau, and we will tell you that she's involved in some dark, shifty, shady business. Mm-hmm. We won't tell you exactly what, but her character... She makes you kind of like hold your breath on her intro and you're like, who is at the door?
It's so much fun. It has those dark comedy elements. It really reminds me of like early Coen Brothers.
Yeah.
And that fun tone, like Fargo or something, where there's like this dark stuff happening, but somehow it's really comedic and really fun at times too.
It is.
And like, you're rooting for these characters.
Okay. And there is like a lot of kind of like desperate moments from these characters are all in these pressured positions, I would call them. And I'm talking about everyone. Ruth, Mike, and Remy all have what I would say are somewhat high stakes. Remy's are a little bit more like he's looking to make a life change sort of and trying to make something happen. Mm-hmm. Mike is along those same lines, but under duress.
Yes, and Ruth has some high stakes. She might lose her farm. She has a husband who's in a coma. Yeah. So the stakes are really high for Ruth. And she's felt very jerked around by this company, the association. So there's a lot of layers of years of resentments. So it's not even just about the money for Ruth. I think part of it is like sticking it to the association.
Oh, definitely. Sticking it to the man. Mm-hmm. Huge theme in this where we get to see how upset the town is. Like, town is upset.
She's not the only one.
She is not the only one. And this is true to the actual true story it's based on. We don't know how much you guys know about this, but maple syrup, we're not talking like $1 million worth of maple syrup. I think in the reserve it's something like $250 million or $150 million. Yeah. And, you know, that's the fictional number on the show, but I know the real number is not that far off. And in the actual heist, they stole millions of dollars worth of maple syrup. It's crazy.
It's a wild story. I had no idea maple syrup was that expensive.
Yeah.
Big business.
It's
maple
big
syrup.
business.
Yes.
Susan Clement plays Detective Valerie Nadeau, who comes in to assist our local sheriff, who is...
Teddy Green, the local cop, played by Gita Miller, and they kind of butt heads a little bit. The detective who comes into town's a little bit condescending to Gita's character Teddy, who knows these people. She knows Remy. She knows this community. So it's interesting to see kind of the friction between, you know, the big city detective and the local law enforcement.
And Valerie has this like reputation. When she comes in, Teddy's like, oh, I know who you are. And she's like, yeah, I know you know. Like, you've been waiting for me.
Right. Basically, everything you do is wrong.
I believe one of her first lines on her intro is, I'm here to clean up your mistakes. Which,
basically.
Shots fired. Yes. But there is some interesting development between those characters that we were like, what? Where's that going?
This is such a fun ride. Highly recommend.
Let's talk about some villains, because we got villains in this. So our main villain, Jenny, tell us about him.
Yeah, so we have kind of a main villain. He's the one that's after Ruth's farm, and he has this big company called the Association, where he's been buying up people's maple syrup farms. And this is Leonard, played by Guy Nadon, and you love to hate him.
Yes.
He's horrible.
And then he has kind of an interesting protege, who's his son, Charlie, played by Mark O'Brien. And he walks a little bit more on the line. Like, he doesn't want people to hate him. And at the same time, he's invested so much in his dad, and he wants the company to succeed. So he's trying to kind of... Interestingly, the son is trying to guide the father, but the father is pretty determined to show his son how it's done.
Yeah, there's some friction there as well. So, yeah, definitely some dynamics within the villainous characters that are... It's a little competitive there.
Yeah. So let's talk about how this is shot. From the jump, I told Jenny, I really like the camera movement in this show. On literally the opening shot, we get a nice steady cam in, and you are taken right into the action. Funny enough, it's very funny that I'm going to bring this up. If you guys watch our last episode, we did Twin Peaks. We were talking about the X-Files a lot. There is a shot in the first episode that I said to Jenny, this is so interesting. This is a shot that the X-Files would do because they're shooting through like a main window as someone walks in and comes in. And I said X-Files.
Kind of a cold open reveal to a mystery that you later discover.
It's a fun cold open too. There is some really cool things going on with like directing in this. So we have two directors on this. We have Michael Dowse and Joyce Wong. And I really liked... Along with the DP, I'm sure this was, a little bit of everybody chipping in, but there was a really cool scene with Mike where I will just say we see him swinging a baseball bat. And there's some cool intercutting and really great editing on this that I thought... It's interesting because, and you shift and move through different moods, like we were just talking about. Like, it's funny in some parts, and some parts it's like you're like, and other parts it's really tense, and like, you do have modal shifts on this, and I like the moodiness of it.
Yes, yeah.
It's not one decided feel, it's a lot of things,
And the whole thing has a levity under it, and I think there's a brightness to the lighting and the colorization that brings a levity to the story, even though it is a dark comedy.
Yeah, lots of yin and yang in this in terms of what's going on versus shooting specs and things like that. Even like you said, lots of bright colors. At one point, Mike is wearing a like fire engine red, huge puffer coat in the middle of the woods.
So goofy.
It's really goofy.
Very goofy.
I believe Ruth says she calls him a Christmas ornament.
Yeah, yes,
Christmas balls.
Oh my goodness. It's so much fun. You will not be disappointed. It is such a fun ride and such an interesting story.
Yeah, and we have, again, themes of desperate times call for desperate measures, going to extremes, emotion, like packed emotion. There's a lot of suppressed emotion, and that emotion like bubbling over.
And a little bit of this like David and Goliath, like the, taking on the big corporation.
Yeah, sticking it to the man.
Yeah.
In many ways. And I will say there is... we have like some corporate stuff going on. We also have some black market dealings going on. There's a organized crime. That's the words I'm looking for.
Organized crime.
We have that element involved.
Boston.
Yeah.
The Boston mob. Yes. Highly recommend. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, if you're anything like us, you'll watch all 6 episodes in one night.
Right? Especially when Jamie Lee Curtis comes in there. You're like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
She's fantastic, too. At this point, I have done a little research. I think they're not quite confirmed for a second season, but the last article I saw was good news about a second season.
I hope so, because there are questions I still have.
We have so many questions, and the setup for a second season is 100% there.
I think we'll see a second season.
Yeah. We were so lucky to be able to interview someone from Post from The Sticky.
We hope you enjoy the interview.
See you when you get back.
Well, thanks for talking with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's nice that you're trying to talk about the show, which is cool.
Yeah. We binged it. We watched all 6 in one night.
Yeah, I mean,
and then we have watched the whole thing.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, when you break it down, it's really like a 3-hour movie, so it's actually quite doable. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, and and I think the feedback's been pretty positive from what I hear.
But yeah, that's the thing we wanted to touch on is like what was your journey? How did you become
you said 30 years ago PA work?
Yeah. Well, I'm 50. Oh, geez, I was going to say 53, but I just turned 54. It's so depressing.
You don't look that at all.
You're very kind, so that's good.
There we go.
But no, I started, I was, like most people who love movies, like I watched a lot of movies as a kid. I worked in a video store for many years. I worked as an usher in a movie theater. I did do some on-set work, like I was a PA. I worked with sound and camera assisting and stuff like that. And but I really was always interested in editing. But and I did film school. I did a film communications program in a college here in Montreal. When I was a TA, I was helping the students with their films. And there came a point where I got told by the teachers that I was too hands-on with their projects. So I was like, okay, I gotta go and actually work and make films.
What would you say is your first like big film, like big project that you were like, oh, I'm moving on?
One of the first films that really hit it big for me was a movie called The Trotsky with Jay Baruchel. I don't know if you know, Jay does a lot of comedies. And that was like a sort of a variation on like a Ferris Bueller type movie. That was like one of the first ones that sort of did well. It went to the Tribeca Film Festival. Like it did all kinds of things.
Awesome.
And then, down the road, there was a bunch of things like there's a movie called Deadfall with Eric Bana and Charlie Hunnam. All kinds of stuff. Obviously, The Sticky was a big deal. And I did a film.
Huge.
Yeah.
Jamie Lee Curtis. That's a big name.
As an editor, we tend not to go to set just because it allows us to have a real perspective on the material. But like Jamie Lee Curtis, I brought my 20-year-old son to set, and so we hung out a bit. And she is just a lovely, lovely person. And it was great to have her. She was actually, I think, initially was supposed to play the role that Margo plays. That was the initial thing. She literally won the Oscar just before we started filming. So she actually, I think, recommended Margo for the role.
Wow. And Margo's fantastic in that role.
Margo's like, when you see her, you're like, well, it can't be anybody but her. And the character she played, I think, initially was a man. And so they turned that into her character. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, I'd like to hear that.
She was fantastic. Her performance in this was fantastic. Yeah. Was there any specific films or directors when you were young that really inspired you to want to get?
It's all the classics, Spielberg, Star Wars, like all those things were I was a big James Bond fan. One of my friends was working in San Francisco, and I also knew somebody in my family who knew somebody who worked at Skywalker Ranch, George Lucas's facility. So she set up a meeting so that I can go visit and see Skywalker Ranch. So I went there, spent a day there, and discovered like all of the sort of sound. And they were remixing the original 3 films at the time. So it's like, as you can imagine, you're walking down corridors and you hear like Darth Vader in one room because they're doing all the sound of the remixed versions of the films. And I came out of that experience, just kind of blown away of going there, but then realizing like those were all normal people, like, because you have this idea that, that it's unattainable, that all these people work like, in another level of the world. And that sort of made me sort of, exactly.
Being that there's 2 directors on this project, how does it affect like TV when you have different directors come in? Do they come in and edit with you? Is it the same as like films where you're working very closely with directors?
Well, in the same respect, there are also 2 editors on the show. There's another editor called Ivan who did episodes 1, 3, and 5, and I did 2, 4, and 6. So he started it and I finished it. And what we do, we talk a lot while we're editing. There was a time when we were editing in the same place, but given how the world has changed, we work remotely a bit more. But a lot of times you'll have like the prominent director on the show will like in this case, Michael Dowse did episodes 1 and 2 and 5 and 6, and Joyce Wong did 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And it sort of worked out in the sense that tonally those shows like 1 and 2 are obviously we're setting the tone But 3 and 4 are kind of the more, I wouldn't say that's not true because 5 and 6 are pretty zany, but 3 and 4 are kind of like, it's almost like Three Stooges in that truck, and then there's the stuff in the strip club and all this stuff. So it kind of worked out that she did those, so that it felt like there was sort of cohesiveness just naturally by virtue of the shows being slightly tonally different. When I'm working on a film that's shot, let's say in the fall, I always tend to say, like, even though we're almost finished by Christmas, let's say if it's a 4-month gig or something, I often say, like, let's take the holidays off and come back and just watch it with fresh eyes. And those 2 weeks are usually amazing. Like on most projects, I try to find a way in the schedule where we can just step away from it for a couple of weeks and just go and watch it with fresh eyes.
Did the directors come in and did Michael and Joyce come into the editing room with you and walk you through what they wanted and all that? Yeah.
I mean, we often like talk beforehand as well. I mean, television is kind of pretty fast paced. One of the things I always try to do is sit in on the read through. Even though even on the episodes I'm not doing, just so I'll get a sense of the episode. It's kind of like it's like an audiobook of the script, so it's a little more fun to watch. Plus the actors are also discovering it because there's rewrites and things like that, and it was like a nice way to sort of get acquainted. But like I said, that it's more of a producer writer medium, so they get, I forget how many days, and then it's the producers and the writers that come in and do their pass on it. And then there's like the producer notes, the studio notes, network note, so there's a whole process. Yeah.
What do you do if you get conflicting notes? Who do you
That's always, it's like anything. There's a lot of diplomacy involved, that, how you respond to the notes. I think, sometimes there are sort of notes that might feel like they come out of left field, but, I always think that even the weirdest notes that seem to come out of nowhere, that person felt that for whatever reason, and there's a chance that someone else will feel that way as well. So you have to think about it and then keep a sort of perspective on it. At the end of the day, it's like the producers and the showrunners are really kind of managing all those things. There's always a thing where at the beginning of the process, you're like, oh, it's too long. We have to cut. And then their stuff will automatically cut because we know we don't need this. We say this twice, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But what'll happen?
Do you ever get like really attached to a cut and you're like, no, I really wanted this part in there, and you have to delete it out?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. At the end of the day, it's like, I'm a hired hand. They hire me because of my opinions and my ideas, but there comes a point where there has to be one person that decides, because otherwise it's sort of, it becomes too chaotic and there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and but it's like in any working environment, you have to get a little, you got to pick your battles. But honestly, on this show, it didn't play that way, and it was an embarrassment of riches. We had so many great scenes, great moments. It's more like we know we have to cut it down because it's just too long. So we have to bring it back. You mentioned when we started that you binge watched the whole thing in one shot. And the reason for that is because it flows and you kind of, you just want to get to the next thing. And ideally that's pretty good too.
There's probably so much ad-lib stuff. You're like, oh my God, this is hilarious. I want to keep it in. We've got to go.
No, that was I mean, for me, the scene I probably enjoyed the most was the strip club, because they were really funny when they're talking, and and they ended up putting like one of my favorite lines in the show was it's in the trailer. It's like, oh, Nancy Kerrigan, what a woman.
Ordinary.
I mean, the premise itself is kind of crazy, like when you think of it, syrup is actually worth more than, I don't want to say gold, but it's like it's and this is why the robbery actually happened. Someone realized like nobody's guarding this stuff and it's worth a lot of money. Well, when you hear the pitch, you're just like, oh, this has got to be funny. Like they're going to steal maple syrup and millions of dollars of it. Obviously, the real story and our story are worlds apart. It's kind of inspired by that, but it has like little to nothing to, like, there was no mob, nobody died, like nothing happened. Like it's like literally two guys and a U-Haul truck over a year, like, because they were stealing a bit every week over a year. So it's like not, but it doesn't make for very compelling television.
No,
like,
you guys did a better job cooking up a story. That's
so much fun.
it was such a like thrill ride. The show is moody and the tone changes a lot from fun to kind of these like more grounded, darker scenes. How does that work for you in an editing room where you're like, okay, this scene is really dark, but then this next scene is completely comical? How do you move fluidly from something that's like comedy to like somebody's dead or something?
It's a bit of a dance, and it's like an ebb and flow, like you know, but it's like even if you're doing a straight out comedy, you can't just make people laugh nonstop. Like it's literally like sometimes physically exhausting. Not that this show is like a nonstop like laughing, but what happens is it's like a rhythmic thing, like, or you know, if you're doing a drama, let's say, and you have an intimate dialogue scene, well, you don't want 3 intimate dialogue scenes in a row. Like you want to go outside, you want to have something else happen. This is often what happens in terms of when you were talking about the, you know, we're the sort of last hand on the writing, because sometimes we'll take a scene that was supposed to come way later and bring it earlier, and vice versa. And so that happens a lot in editing. And it's oftentimes like we'll even do like a board where we see color coded. We have a scene here, we have a scene here, or we even do it in the Avid, because you could see like certain colors or certain scenes or certain locations, let's say. And then you're like, oh, we don't even have to look at it because we just watched the episode. We're like, we're really in, let's say, Ruth's house 3 times in a row. Like, let's mix it up and make this happen before this. And like
different locations. That's cool.
Yeah, and
I
just
didn't
like
really know that was part of the process.
You also feel it as a viewer. You're compelled because you don't feel like the story is sort of in a holding pattern. Like, you know, I'm not gonna lie, like we all aspire to be like a Coen Brothers movie, because this is the kind of realm of crazy people. What they do so well is like things that seem disconnected from the plot that are really character based. So here we have to walk a fine line between advancing the plot, but also giving you these really quirky, interesting character moments. But that's in the really writing cool. as well, you know. I mean, it's in the writing. When Ed and Brian came up with the show, like that was all there, and I think at the end of the day, it was just a little more streamlined.
So that being said, what do you think is the most challenging thing about this project, like editing this project, and like the easiest components for you?
So challenging, I guess, is what we were just talking about, is finding that sort of balance between the comedy, the drama. You can accept like someone doing something stupid like once or twice, but if they do many stupid things in a row, you kind of lose faith in that character, and you don't want to follow them anymore, because you're like, they're just too dumb. Like it's just not. And so not that this is the case here, although they do dumb things. But you're kind of rooting for them, and that's the thing. That's what I was talking about, sort of grounding emotionally things, knowing that, you know, this character has these problems, like you care for them, so that if they mess up, you're like almost overlooking the dumbness of whatever they did, and like you just want them to get over it. To go back to your initial talk about the tone shifts and things like that, I would say that was the hardest thing. But I think in the end, it's sort of you know, it's like life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You know, you make it work for you, not against you.
So what's next for you? You said you've done, so we have a couple things that sounds like in post for you. What is the one that you shot where you were in the woods and all that? Is that done, or are you still working on that?
The one in the woods is going to be on Apple, and that's like a big sort of action show called The Last Frontier, it's called.
Cool.
And it's and I was actually not an editor per se on the episodes. I was like hired locally to help, because it's a big action show. It's fascinating because of the technique. The director of that, Sam Hargrave, he's like a stunt guy who did the Avengers movies, all these Marvel movies, and so he's been directing for a few films now. And his technique is doing these long oneers, like a one take, where he basically the impression you have is like it's a one uncut take, but it's actually multiple takes of different things, but sort of edited in a way so that you feel it's continuous. And the other thing is a pilot, which I can't really talk about because I don't know if it's been greenlit for series. But yeah, I'll send you a note if it goes to series.
Please. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's
Yeah,
really
The
cool.
Last Frontier sounds fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. It was a crazy
Yeah.
show.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk with us.
Yeah.
We
My
love the
pleasure.
show. We love your work. We thought the show on the whole was just so well
It was
made.
so fun.
And obviously, if we watched all 6 episodes, you guys did something right. So, like in one night.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. And I will just say that obviously big shout out to the cast, the crew, everybody. You were saying like what was easy about the show is just like working with top class people and our showrunners, Ed and Brian were amazing and really, great collaborators. And Michael and Joyce, the directors were fantastic. And we're part of the whole team, and obviously the other editor, Ivan Thibodeau, who's the co-editor who did the three of the 6, and I did the other 3. But it's a team sport.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Arthur. We appreciate your work and we appreciate your time and we just appreciate you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for appreciating our show. Take care.
Yes, have a great
And good luck in LA. We think of you guys a lot.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I noticed the California.
Yeah, shout out to the Cali hat. We were like,
Yes. It's my favorite. It's my favorite cap. So, all right.
Well, thanks, Arthur. Have a great night.
Take
and a
care.
great
Bye,
time.
guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We really hope you guys enjoyed that interview. We feel so grateful to everyone who has sat down and talked to us and given us these little inside bits to share with you guys about these shows.
It's really something that makes this show really special to be able to sit down and talk to these people, and they give such a valuable insight behind the scenes, and we really, really appreciate all of the interviews that we've had so far, and we hope you all have enjoyed the interviews.
So much so that you will join us next week for episode 5.
Yes.
Watch The Sticky on Amazon.
The Sticky!
Woo!
Thank you for tuning in for this episode on The Sticky.
And we'll see you guys for week 5. We're going to do another TV show. Join us next week on Propicks!